When control wears a smile, sometimes the heaviest weight is the one you never learned a name for. It's not shouted, it doesn't leave bruises, it doesn't demand, it whispers, it suggests, it praises you when you comply. And slowly, almost invisibly, you stop being fully yours, not out of fear, out of habit, out of a longing to belong, out of a confusion between peace and permission. There are people who have never been physically trapped, but who have lived their entire lives inside cages made of obligation, of guilt, of emotional debt. They call it love, they call it loyalty, but underneath there's a quiet ache, the ache of being steered without consent, of feeling your truth but walking in someone else's direction, of asking yourself too often, "Is this what I want?" and being too exhausted to answer. Seneca once said, "A person who follows the crowd will never go further than the crowd. A person who walks alone is likely to find themselves in places no one has ever been before. But walking alone requires a compass, and manipulation begins the moment you hand that compass over, not to cruelty but to comfort, not to oppression but to praise. That's what makes it so hard to notice. It doesn't feel like force, it feels like care, it feels like safety, until you try to turn and realize you can't. Ryan Holiday wrote, "Ego is the enemy, but so is the need for external validation." And in that sentence lives a truth many have felt, but few name. We are not just afraid of failure. We are afraid of disapproval. We are afraid of rejection. And in that fear, we become moldable. We become malleable, not out of weakness, out of pain. Manipulation is not a chain around your wrist. It's a thread woven quietly around your choices. It wraps itself around how you speak, how you pause, how you smile, how you hold your needs beneath your tongue. You don't see it, not until you try to move in a direction it didn't choose. Then the thread pulls, then you feel it. Then you realize you are not as free as you thought. This is not a judgment, it's an awakening. Because the moment you see the thread, the moment you name it, something inside begins to stir. And that stirring is not anger, it's not rebellion, it's authorship. The deep, sacred instinct to write your life in your own language again, to walk without leashes, to speak without shrinking, to feel the ground under your feet and know it's yours. Alert 1. You feel guilty. When you say no, guilt can wear many faces. It can sound like kindness. It can sound like responsibility. It can sound like love, but sometimes guilt is the echo of your truth being silenced. Sometimes guilt is the alarm bell of self-betrayal ringing quietly beneath your smile. You feel it every time you say yes when something in you wants to say no, not because you don't care, but because you've been taught that caring means sacrificing your own boundary. When guilt appears every time you try to set a limit, that's not love, that's conditioning. It's the result of someone using your empathy as a leash, of turning your compassion into compliance. It doesn't need raised voices. It doesn't need ultimatums. It just needs your fear of disappointing to be stronger than your right to choose. But true connection doesn't require betrayal. It doesn't demand your silence. It doesn't punish your authenticity. The people who love you will not need you to shrink in order to stay. And yet, even knowing this, the word no can still feel dangerous. That's why healing begins not with others, but with yourself. Look in the mirror, not metaphorically, literally. Look into your own eyes. Say no. Say it not with anger, but with presence. Say it like a tree resisting the wind, not because it hates the breeze, but because it knows how to root. Say it again. Feel where the resistance lives in your body. Is it in your chest? Your throat, your breath, that's where the leash lives. Because a tree that bends too much with every breeze forgets how to rise. And you were not born to bend for everyone. You were born to stand, not against the world, but for yourself. And the word no is not rejection, it is redirection. It is remembering that your center matters too, that your peace deserves to be protected, even if it makes someone else uncomfortable, especially then. Alert 2. Your peace depends on someone else's mood. There is a kind of silence that isn't calm, it's calculation. A silence where you're not resting, you're reading, watching their eyes, measuring their breath, listening not to understand, but to anticipate. You're not with them, you're beneath them. navigating their weather, adjusting your tone, managing their storm, and calling it peace. But that's not peace. That's emotional captivity. That's being pulled into someone else's turbulence and forgetting you were born with your own sky. It doesn't have to be loud to be manipulation. Sometimes it looks like emotional whiplash. One moment they're warm, the next they're cold, and your nervous system follows, loyal to the rhythm of their unpredictability. This isn't just poetic, it's biological. Mirror neurons, the brain's way of syncing with others, begin to reflect not just expressions, but states. Cortisol rises not just when you're stressed, but when you're near someone whose chaos you can't protect yourself from. Your body begins to echo a storm that was never yours. And you may think it's just how they are, but the question isn't about them, it's about you. Who do you become in their presence? Do you soften into safety or harden into strategy? Does your peace expand or does it hide? Do a mood audit quietly, no confrontation, just track your shifts. Notice who changes your emotional state without saying a word, who tenses your shoulders, who hijacks your stillness, and understand you are not the moon. You were not made to reflect someone else's tides. You are not here to orbit another's storm. You are here to anchor your own calm. You are allowed to hold your peace even when others lose theirs. That's not selfish. That's sovereignty. That's knowing the difference between empathy and erosion, and choosing each time to come home to yourself first, always. Alert 3. You apologize for existing too loudly. Sometimes the most dangerous manipulation doesn't silence you, it shapes you. It teaches you to lower your voice not because it's wrong, but because it's too real. It teaches you to soften your truth not because it hurts, but because it disrupts. It teaches you to be pleasing instead of present. This doesn't always come through criticism. Often it arrives in praise, in comments that seem like compliments, but are actually cages. You're so easy to be around. You're so good at adapting. You're never too much. And you start to believe that your worth lives in your ability to be small, that love is earned through edit, that to be accepted, you must dilute. But this isn't kindness, it's reinforcement. It rewards compliance and punishes authenticity. It makes you question your laughter, your tears, your fullness, until you stop taking up space. Not because you want to, but because you've been taught that space isn't safe. Here's the truth. Confidence is not arrogance. Presence is not offense. You were not meant to fit someone's comfort. You were meant to embody your own truth, fully, clearly, without apology. So write down 3 things you no longer say because you fear being too much. 3 truths you shrink. 3 parts of you that whisper instead of roar. And then remember, a lion that whispers to be accepted by sheep forgets what it was born to do. You were not born to be palatable. You were born to be whole. And wholeness sometimes is loud, not aggressive, alive, not threatening, uncompromised. And when you stop apologizing for your volume, you begin to reclaim your voice, yourself, your freedom to exist. Not edited, not approved, not explained, just as you are. Alert 4. You're always justifying your choices. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from explaining too much, from carrying the weight of needing to be understood, defended, approved. Not once, not occasionally, but all the time. As if your life were a courtroom, as if your choices needed permission, as if your own clarity weren't enough. Manipulation doesn't always silence your voice. Sometimes it floods you with the need to explain it, to over-rationalize every no, to cushion every yes, to preface your truth so softly that it no longer sounds like you. And slowly, without noticing, you start defending your life as if it doesn't belong to you. This isn't about logic. It's about control. When someone trains you to explain everything, what they're really doing is planting doubt. Doubt in your instincts, doubt in your pace, doubt in your right to move without a script. And so you stay, not in agreement, but in exhaustion. Epictetus reminds us, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And the need to be understood by everyone is one of those things, because truth does not need consensus, And choice does not need applause. Let there be a day, just one, where you observe yourself in silence, where you don't explain, where you act, speak, move, without offering a reason, not in rebellion, in reclaiming, not to provoke, but to remember that you are not a defendant, you are the judge, you are the author, because when you justify everything, you begin to believe that your truth isn't self-sufficient. And it is, it always was. You just forgot, beneath the layers of doubt, of worry, of trying to make everyone else comfortable. But your life is not a performance. It's a path, and you don't need permission to walk it. Only presence, only integrity, only the quiet courage to say, "This is my choice," and let that be enough. Alert 5. You keep shrinking your needs. There's a silence that's mistaken for strength, a quiet self-erasure that gets called humility. But it's not peace, it's not maturity. It's the learned belief that your needs are too much, that your presence must always be convenient, that to be loved, you must disappear just enough to not disturb. This kind of manipulation doesn't demand that you give up your voice. It just conditions you to use it only when it's agreeable, to need, but never too loudly, to feel, but never interrupt, to want, but only what doesn't inconvenience others. And over time, this becomes your default. You anticipate discomfort before it arrives. You make yourself smaller before anyone even asks. But this is not balance. This is erasure, because needs are not burdens, they are blueprints. They show you where you end and someone else begins. They show you where boundaries live and where healing begins. Needing is not a flaw. It's human. It's whole. It's the compass that points you back to yourself. And when you minimize those needs long enough, something quiet starts to erode. Your identity, not because someone took it, but because you stopped claiming it, because you made everyone else's comfort more sacred than your own clarity. Neuroscience calls it identity erosion, a slow, almost imperceptible loss of self caused by chronic self-abandonment. And the remedy isn't shouting. It's voicing, gently, daily, directly. Each morning, speak one need out loud to yourself, just one. Not to ask, not to justify, just to witness, to honor, to remind your nervous system that your truth matters, even in private, especially there. Because a flower doesn't ask the garden if it's okay to bloom. It simply rises, it simply opens. Not against anything, but in alignment with what it is. And maybe the most radical thing you can do is to do the same, quietly, unapologetically, completely. Conclusion: break the thread, reclaim the core. Not all prisons have locks. Some are woven with gestures, with glances, with the slow conditioning of your soul to forget its own voice. Manipulation isn't always brutal. Sometimes it's subtle, spiritual, hidden inside dynamics we've learned to call normal. And that's what makes it powerful and dangerous. But the moment you begin to name it, something changes. The spell breaks, the fog lifts, and you begin to see not just what has shaped you, but what you're ready to reshape. This is not a call to fight. It's a call to remember that your center was never lost, only quiet, only buried beneath 1,000 compromises that were never yours to carry. Seneca said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving." This isn't about elitism, it's about alignment, about choosing circles that don't just tolerate your truth, but help it breathe deeper. Circles that don't ask you to shrink, but to expand. Circles that see you not as a role to fill, but as a soul to unfold. And in the silence beneath all reaction, Ryan Holiday reminds us, stillness is power. Because the more still you are, the less reactive you become. The more anchored you are, the harder you are to move by manipulation. Stillness doesn't mean passivity, it means presence. It means you are no longer pulled by tides that don't belong to you. End your day with one question, not as punishment, as realignment. Did I act from truth or react from fear? Let that question be your compass. Let it show you where the threads still pull and where they're ready to be cut, because your soul is not a puppet. It was not made to perform safety for others. It was made to move from the inside out, with clarity, with stillness, with conviction. And maybe it's time to gather every quiet part of yourself that learned to bend and say with love, with strength, with full breath, I'm home now, I move from within. Move.